Hello, today I'm shooting a short video tutorial in response to a request that we received on xBim.coldplex.com to a user that is asking how is it possible through xBim to extract the area of spaces from IFC file. In particular, he's finding a problem because he is trying to export an IFC from Revit 2014 and the file information does not seem to be there. So we'll see how we try to search for this information in an IFC file and how we can see it through our xBim toolkit in your .NET application. So this page presents the discussion that Ricardo has started. What he has done is actually to write a bit of code to open an IFC model and investigate the different stories in it, and for each of the spaces contained in them, get information about the area through a getNetFloorArea extension of the space objects. But the problem that Ricardo is facing is that the information that he hopes to find is not actually found in the model. So we will now test this, starting from Revit 2014, exporting an IFC file and seeing how this works. We are in Revit now. I will quickly draft the spaces that we need to extract the information, just very quickly. A basic wall, an internal separation, an internal divider to make two different spaces inside that, just to have something nice to show. We'll also add an external door here and another door here to allow you movement. And the final thing that we want to do is to go to the architectural menu and actually define rooms. So I'll be attaching a room on this end and a room on this end. Revit now knows that these two rooms have a specific dimension. Room 1, 106 square meters, room 2, 117 square meters. What we're going to do now is to save the model and export it in IFC. The version of the IFC export that I'm using at the moment is not the standard IFC exporting tool, but the open source version that Autodesk has been providing for a couple of years. If we decide to, so in this menu I can select the way in which the IFC is compiled, and if I want to show you that if we just use IFC Coordination View 2.0 and export, which is one of the standards, I'll save the file and now fire up xBim to have a look at the contents. Right, we're now in xBim. I'm opening the file, and after a quick meshing we can see the 3D model of the file with the two doors that we have defined previously. We can browse through the different elements and select the rooms here, and you can see them highlighted. The two rooms have been defined. And what I wanted to highlight here is that some of the properties are filled in, GUIDs, ownerships. There is some information about references. However, there are no quantities and very little properties presented for this space, and the same applies to the other room here. The reference is filled in, but there are no quantities and no properties of other interest. The reason for this lack of information is actually associated with the settings that we have selected for export. If I go back to the user interface, I can show you how to modify the setup and set it to an in-session setup mode, where you have a number of options that allow you to export base quantities for all the items, and internal Revit property sets, along with standard common property sets. So if we now confirm this and export the file again, we will give it a different name, area test 2, or better, area test with properties, and move back to xBim, model, open. I open the second file, and after the meshing we have now a view of the spaces. So we can start watching at the spaces, and now you can see that the information here presents gross floor area and gross perimeter and the height of the space, and in our property sets more information available. Actually the area is also exported here along with the perimeter, because this is also an Autodesk standard property. Now that we have seen the properties inside the model, we can fire up our query mechanism to actually investigate a little deeper how the information is actually stored in the IFC file. And I wanted to start you by showing a feature that we have to query the model by file type. So I know that we're looking at we want to investigate the model by starting from stories. So my the command that I'm executing in the querying mechanism is the selection with a short form of reporting of all the building stories. Now in this case, the execution of this results in a single building story being found. But there are inside this a number of information associated with the way in which this is decomposed. So we can now see that this building story is actually decomposed in 2 rooms. So if I ask this query mechanism, it's going actually to list to me both of these, and here they are. So room 1 and room 2. Both of them then end up having definitions and so properties that are associated with that. So this query interface allows us to navigate the structure of IFC files, searching for any information that we are particularly interested in. Now what we know is that we want to investigate the properties of the definition of these spaces, and I can come here and ask it like this, and so these are the names of the rooms with the property sets, and we can have a look at all the properties definition associated with them. And here is the information. We have base quantities, we have a number of other properties associated. So let's go now back to see the code that Ricardo has produced and see why is it that it didn't work. I have started so I've just launched Visual Studio, and I'll be producing from scratch a new project where I'm producing a console application that is called Demo App. And there we go. Now the next step for us is to go and specify to the system that we want to use NuGet to install xBim as part of the libraries that this application will use. So I go here and search for xBim. I'll install the full xBim 3D. I'll pause while the system completes the download of all applications. So okay, now the application has been downloaded and installed, so the toolkit has been downloaded. Now if I look into my references, I have plenty of libraries associated with xBim here. ready for me to use. The next step is to go and look at Ricardo's code and bring it in. So very likely you will find something like that. All these underlined elements will be errors because they are not recognized as standard keywords, but by using these helpers I can tell the system to use xBim.io, and from this moment on it's going to be recognized. There is a keyboard shortcut for this and I'll be using that. To quickly add all the references that are needed, area measures, and there we go. This one will not work for get net floor area because this is an extension property. So I need to go up to the using statements and just explicitly reference the extensions library. And now this function is also recognized and we can actually start compiling our application, which has succeeded now. Before I can launch it though, I want to make a couple of changes here at the top because I want to make reference to different files. So I'll pause quickly to change that so that I point to the files that I've just produced and not to the files that are coming from the sample online. So I'm replacing these two initial lines with a set of instructions that I've produced before that will specify the name of the file to load and the folder where to load it, the name of the xBim converted file, and the same activity that you would see in the previous code base. One thing I wanted to say though is that for these purposes we don't need to generate the geometry of the model, so we'll remove this line and also remove this line that only counts the items but is not used later in the code. Analyzing the code here, Ricardo wants to extract a list of all the stories and call them pisos in Espanol. And he's using a couple of commands here, but there is actually a better way to do this, which I'll demonstrate now. So pisos can be produced without the production of these previous lines, just by starting from the model and loading the instances of a particular type, and we're looking for IFC building stories. Now this function returns all the stories of the model in one single call. Later on, this area variable is defined, and we can define it like this here. The subsequent code enumerates all the stories, and for each of them looks at the is decomposed by property. This property contains one or many relationships between the object and other related objects, but the second line lists all of them and puts them into the objs field or variable. Eventually, this object's variable is filtered to look at the ones that are of type IFC space. So spaces ends up being extracted, is a collection of spaces that has been extracted by looking at the way in which the initial story was decomposed in the IFC schema. At this point, very simply, the spaces collection is enumerated in this loop, and the variable area is taken from this method extension getNetFloorArea. The next step for us is to run the code and see at the numbers that we received on the file called simplemodelwithproperties.ifc that we've created before. However, before we can do this, there is a last bit of configuration that is needed, because xBim has a fairly sophisticated logging mechanism, and the configuration of the logging file is done through the app.config file that you will see in the Solution Explorer in the home, in the root folder. I have previously prepared a valid app.config, and I'll show you how to copy and paste this code in here. So just after the configuration opening tag, we are going to paste the config sections tag and then the log4net tag. This tells the system to create a file that is called logfile.txt with all the information that are logged through the execution of xBim. We are now ready to run, but before that I will come down to the loop of spaces and put a breakpoint so that the code will stop when reaching this point. Launch the application and the breakpoint is happening. Now it's telling me that the space we are looking at the moment is the first one, room 1, and the function executed here returns an area of 0. This is not what we expected, and we'll next step to see what are the reasons for that. And the reasons are to be found in the code of xBim, of the getNetFloorArea extension method. And here is the code that we are executing with the getNetFloorArea function. It's fairly simple. It looks whether there is a net floor area property under the base quantities of the space. Failing that, it looks at the net floor area under any other quantity grouping other than base quantities. And again, failing that, it looks for a quantity called JSA space areas and returns the GSA BIM area. But none of these is available in our specific model. The net so we actually see that the only area available exported is the gross floor area and the gross perimeter. So here is explained the reason for the value missing in the code. If we actually go back to our implementation and change the function that we use to space dot get gross floor area, we will find that Revit has actually exported them. So I've now started the application. I'm putting a breakpoint when the area is being calculated, and here we are. We can find that our area is now available, is 105 meters for one of the rooms and of 116 meters for the second one. We will now try and embellish a little this code so that this information is provided in a more complete fashion. So we will start by writing something to the console when any story is being looked at. So we'll just write story and the story name, and then this character mean to go to the next line. And again, for the rest here, we can actually do something similar and write console, write area, and then or better information about the space, and its area. So we are replacing the parameters down here with space dot name and area dot area value. Now launching this application, we will see what we get? We get story, level 0, space 1, area 105.8. And we step again forward in our application, and the second space has been identified and listed. So there you go. The information was available in the FC file, but it wasn't available where the information was looked for. And yeah, it can be tricky to see in IFC file where the information is and whether we are using the correct functions to get them. But you have to know that xBim offers you lots of tools to see whether the information is actually available in the through the xBim Explorer user interface, and also allows you to look at the specific code to see whether the correct information has been sought through the code, because you have access to the full source code and you can see where things go wrong. I will post all of the source code and of this little demo application in a zip file that you can download from the overarching.it website in the blog section when this video will be presented. And comments are open, so if you have any questions or information that you need to ask me about any of these aspects, please get in touch through the overarching.it website in the contacts section. Thank you very much and hope to see you soon.